Hi, I'm Laura Winthrop Abbott, Executive Vice President of the U.S. Japan Council. Today, we're deeply honored to host a special dialogue on addressing the climate crisis with John Kerry, United States Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, and KOIZUMI Shinjiro, Japan's Minister of the Environment. Secretary Kerry was the U.S. Senator representing my home state of Massachusetts for 28 years, and then served as the 68th Secretary of State during President Obama's second term. I've been very fortunate to have worked with him both on the Hill and at the State Department. In January 2021, he was appointed by President Biden to lead the United States' effort to address the global climate crisis. KOIZUMI Shinjiro served as a member of Japan's House of Representatives starting in 2009. And in 2012, he became the Vice Minister for Reconstruction, focused on the recovery of the tsunami-devastated Tohoku region. In 2019, KOIZUMI Shinjiro was appointed as Minister of the Environment and has served in that capacity under both Prime Minister Abe and Prime Minister Suga. He was also given a new role as Minister in charge of climate change in March this year. USJC is a people-to-people organization focused on leveraging connections between the United States and Japan to address issues that matter for our countries and for the world. And climate change is perhaps the key issue of our time. It's an issue where our two advanced industrialized economies can and must work together to develop solutions for this planet we share. The U.S. Japan Council is thrilled to use its convening power to bring together a diverse network of stakeholders from across sectors today to hear from these two world leaders and to catalyze further action in addressing this urgent climate crisis. Before turning to our esteemed guests, I'd like to hand it over to Paul Yonomine, the chair of the U.S. Japan Council's Board of Directors, for a few brief remarks. Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Laura, for the introduction. I am the chair of the Board of Directors of the U.S. Japan Council. With over a decade of involvement with this council, I could say no organization has a greater impact bringing people across sectors to address key issues for the U.S.-Japan relationship. Today's session on addressing the climate crisis is a key example of that. I am so grateful to everyone for their incredible support in helping us make this possible. 米日カウンセル理事長のポール・ヨナミネでございます。スポンサーの皆様、参加者の皆様、長年にわたり米日カウンセルの活動をご支援いただき、誠にありがとうございます。First, I would like to thank my fellow USJC board members for their leadership, energy, and devotion to our mission. I would also like to thank our members, especially our next generation leaders, who are providing insight and guidance around climate initiatives through their work on various committees and working groups. I know today is just the start of much more important work to come. USJC is further grateful for the continued and expanding opportunities to collaborate with those in both the Biden and Suga administrations, who see the potential for working together to solve the most important priorities that we all share. And very importantly, on the behalf of the Council, I would like to thank the sponsors who make all of our endeavors possible. Starting with our platinum level sponsors, we have Deloitte and Fabit. Next, I'd like to thank our title level sponsors, Amazon, the Aratani Foundation, Central Pacific Bank, Google, Hitachi, Itoen, Mitsui, MUFG, NEC, Oryx, the Terasaki Nibei Foundation, the Toshizo Watanabe Foundation, and the Toyota Research Institute. I would also like to thank our many signature, premier, and gold sponsors for their support, whose names you saw at the start of the webinar and you can find listed in full on USJC's website. We are deeply thankful for everyone who has partnered with USJC to ensure that we can provide quality programming and take this relationship to the next level. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Suzanne Basala, USJC's President and CEO, who will moderate today's dialogue. Over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Paul. The Council is immensely grateful for your leadership and the support that we receive from both the Central Pacific Bank and you. Special thanks as well to our Executive Vice President, Laura Winthrop Abbott, for her kind opening remarks. It's now my privilege to give a warm U.S. Japan Council welcome to two very distinguished guests, the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, and Japan's Minister of the Environment, KOIZUMI Shinjiro. First, Secretary Kerry, thank you so much for joining us. We are recording this on August 24th, 1 week before your planned visit to Tokyo, and we're honored to be part of your pre-travel preparations.
Thank you.
Next, Minister Koizumi, thank you for investing your time with us and supporting USJC's people-to-people activities.
ありがとうございます。
U.S. Japan leadership to address the climate crisis could not be more urgent. Today's dialogue is meant to provide a framework for how the Council can bring its unique cross-sector networks in service of our climate agenda. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. And I'd like to begin with asking about what are the stakes for our planet? The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC report, which was released just a couple weeks ago, described global warming as unequivocal with an unprecedented scale of change, evidenced by recent climate extremes. The UN Secretary General referred to the report as a, quote, code red for humanity. I'd like to ask you if you can help us understand in clear, simple terms, what's at stake. Minister Koizumi, let's start with you.
日本も今、気候危機のこの危機に直面をしています。未だかつてないような長い期間降り続ける雨、そして何十年に一度と言われるような大雨、水害、そして台風、こういった被害に世界の中で最も襲われている一つの国が我々の国、日本であります。今、バサラさんから IPCC、言及がありましたが、この IPCC のレポートの中でも、私は特に3点が今回、新しいレポートの中では重要だと思っています。1つ目のポイントは、20世紀半ば以降の温暖化の主な要因が人間の影響であることは議論の余地がないと言い切ったこと。そして2つ目が、世界中のほぼすべての地域で命に関わる被害をもたらす熱波、豪雨などの極端現象が増加したとされていること。そして最後の3つ目。気温上昇を 1.5 度に抑えることで、近年発生している50年に一度と表現されるような極端な降雨現象の発生する確率を 30% 程度減らし得るとされていること。私は一番重要なのは3点目の点にあると思っています。世界のすべての国が今一丸となって取り組んでいけば、1.5 度目標を達成すれば、気候変動による被害を減らすことができる。この希望のメッセージを私は世界中と共有をして対策の強化をアメリカとともにも進めていきたいと、そう考えています。
Thank you very much, Minister. And you've given us what the challenge is. And Secretary Kerry, would you like to add anything about how you see the stakes?
Well, the stakes couldn't be higher. I mean, I don't know how to say that enough ways. The stakes simply cannot be higher. It's a matter of survival. We hear members of the military, most recently General Tilley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said very clearly in a large meeting that we had with many players that this challenge is existential. Now, we can't keep saying it's existential and not behave like it's existential. So I want to thank you. I want to thank the U.S. Japan Council for having this opportunity to talk. It comes at a moment that the United States-Japan relationship, I think, really is strong, and it's very important that it be strong. We are doing so many things, collaborating in many areas, from regional security to the international political crises, the global economic and finance matters, and on and on. There's just a huge amount we can and must do together. But the bottom line is the IPCC report, it didn't really tell us anything new, but what it did was cement, absolutely lock in the human responsibility for what is happening and the accelerated pace at which it is happening. So we have a huge responsibility. Minister Koizumi and I and others, we were together at the G20 initial ministers meeting to prepare for late October. And we were also together working up towards the G7 when Japan joined the United States in a very important step to be among the group of nations that represent 55% of global GDP. And that 55% of global GDP is committed now to pathways that could keep 1.5 degrees alive. The problem is we have 45%, the other 45% not yet there. And so that's the challenge. And I know Minister Koizumi and I are going to work very, very hard at it because China, India, Russia, South Africa, Mexico, Indonesia, there are a group of countries, Brazil, that must join with us in the effort to use the meeting in Glasgow to adopt a plan for the next 10 years that keeps alive the possibility of achieving 1.5, and equally importantly, keeps alive the ability to get to net zero by 2050.
Great, thank you very much. I think we'll definitely want to talk a little bit more about what it is that can be done to bring the rest of the world along. But first, maybe just kind of referencing the bilateral agenda, and you both talked about the importance of working with each other. So, you certainly had a chance to meet together, work together as recently as in Naples. We know the Secretary Kerry is getting ready to travel to the region. And so with our virtual audience that's gathered here, I was wondering if you could share with us, what are your key messages for each other? And Minister Koizumi, what's the most important message that you would like to convey to Secretary Kerry and or the American people?
まず、私はケリー特使と非常に緊密に日米の間でコミュニケーションをしながら気候変動対策をこのインド太平洋全体も含めて共に共有している重要性を感じながら取り組むことができていることをまずは非常に光栄に思います。なぜなら日本とアメリカは共に民主主義国であり、同じ価値を共有する重要な世界の中で最も重要な同盟関係にあります。自由、民主主義、人権、法の支配、こういった普遍的な価値を共有していて、なおかつ日本とアメリカは非常に高い技術を持っている2カ国でもあります。その技術なども生かして、インド太平洋地域の脱炭素化をこれからも共に協力して進めていくことで、我々2カ国だけではない地域全体の脱炭素化の取り組みを広げていく大きなポテンシャルを持っているのが、我々日米の中で今までの同盟に加えて初めて日米の歴史の中で気候パートナーシップを結んだ、この新たな時代がまさに今日のこのケリー特使と私の対談の機会を米日カウンセルの皆さんが作ってくれた。これ象徴的なことだと思います。そしてさらに重要なのは、気候変動はもはや安全保障の問題とも密接に関わっているということでもあります。日本の中で防衛省が気候変動のタスクフォースというものを防衛省の中に立ち上げました。そして今私が議長を務めている気候変動の適用に関する会議の中でも防衛省がメンバーとなって再生可能エネルギーの導入、そして災害にあった地域での人命救助や被害をあった地域へのさまざまな支援、防衛省という実動部隊が共に動いている、非常に意欲的に動いているというのも、気候変動が安全保障の分野とも密接に関わってきたということを私は改めて表していることだと思います。
Great, thank you.
I agree completely with my friend, Minister Koizumi. I think, we have worked very, very closely together, both he and I personally, as well as our countries, Japan, U.S. And as I said earlier, I think our collaboration, our work is at a very strong level right now. Japan has been a leader on this issue. a critical leader on this issue, because Japan is obviously based in Asia and has important relationships with all the countries there, some of whom are among these nations that we still have to move to leapfrog the mistakes that we've made. Let me be very blunt. Too many countries have had too much dependency on fossil fuel and coal. We can't get to where we need to get to if we don't transition faster. I'm just being blunt about it. And we have to talk reality here. We've been through 4 years in the United States where we've had a complete absence of fact and science and reality in any kind of policy making, to the degree there really was policy making. So now we're in a situation where we have to catch up. We have to make up for time lost. The IPC scientists warned us 3 years ago that we had 12 years within which to make the critical decisions. Now, because President Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement and refused to even talk about climate, we've lost 3 years. And that's something the United States is working hard to make up for now. So my message to my friend, Mr. Koizumi, is he and I and the rest of the G7 have to work very, very hard to bring more of the G20 countries to the same table. Japan joined us in a very bold step. Japan is committed to cut emissions by 46 to 50% over the next 10 years. We've committed to 50 to 52%. That's what the science tells us we have to do. But too many countries have not made strong commitments yet. So, no one country can solve this problem. Even if Japan and the United States went to zero tomorrow, and we're not, we'd still have an enormous problem. So everybody's got to come to this table. This is the greatest test of global cooperation, of global initiative in order to solve a global problem that we've ever faced, ever. And we're proud and pleased to have Japan as a strong partner in this effort.
Secretary Kerry, maybe just following up on that. So, listening to you, it's easy to feel comfortable and confident in the U.S.-Japan cooperation. But as you said, we can't do this alone, and we have to bring everybody else in the world along with us. So what is it that it will take to get the rest of the world to do what's necessary?
It takes leadership. It takes leadership from government. It takes leadership from the private sector. It takes leadership from individuals, non-governmental organizations, from faith-based entities. For every entity in the world that makes up a society in any country has to join in this plea for leaders to make the measures immediately necessary to do what we need to do. Well, we're playing with, I don't mean that this sounds, I'm not being clever or cute when I say we're playing with fire, because too many places are burning up. But in a literal sense, we're playing with fire here. We are not doing the things we know we need to do. I'll give you an example. The International Energy Agency, which has come out with several very important reports also. They're doing a terrific job. They have told us that in order to meet our goals of getting to net zero by 2050, we have to be planting trees and growing forests 5% faster than we are today. We have to be reducing coal 5 times, not 5%, 5 times, that's 500%. We have to be moving 5 times faster than we are today to reduce coal usage. We have to be deploying renewable energy 6 times faster than we are today. And we have to be transitioning to electric vehicles 22 times faster than we are today. So that's the challenge. The IEA said to us, and the IEA, by the way, was an organization built up around representing the oil industry interests. It really came out of the effort to try to coordinate oil industry message and priorities and to create order in the marketplace. But the IEA is now being very clear. We must transition off of fossil fuel, at least unabated fossil fuel use. By that, I mean, if you can capture 100% of your emissions, then fine. The problem, I'm not, and I know Minister Koizumi, neither of us are saying, well, coal, you know, or gas or whatever in its raw form creates the problem. It's the burning of it. It's the way we use it. And the way we use it does not capture those byproducts that do damage, that are creating the problem. Now, we've been at this, I've been at this for 30 years or more. I don't see yet 100% capacity to capture. And in the meantime, we have methane growing as a fundamental challenge, because methane is now being released because of the leakage that takes place in natural gas. Also, the methane is just in raw form going up into the atmosphere because of the permafrost melting and because of the warming of the Arctic in various places where it's been locked in for thousands, tens of thousands of years. Now it's not. And methane is 20 to 80 times more damaging than CO2. So, you know, we're our own worst enemy here. So we have to get out of each other's way and all cooperate to move in the same direction. And I am excited about some of the possibilities that we're looking at, but you know, I have no doubt that wealthiest nations ultimately will get to a zero carbon or a net carbon, you know, economy. But I'm not convinced, not at all, that we will get there in time to avoid profoundly disturbing fundamental transformation in the nature of our planet and the capacity of tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people to be able to survive. That is the fight that we have to make certain, not a question mark.
Well, that's certainly sobering. And maybe I could ask you, Minister Koizumi, to share with us some of your thoughts about how we bring the world along. And I know both of you are preparing for the November COP26 meetings in Glasgow. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how that's important in this context as well, Minister.
より多くの国々を巻き込むっていうその努力が報われた一つが、この前私とケリー特使がイタリアのナポリで同じ時間を同じ部屋で G20 の国々と一緒に過ごしましたが、その中でのさまざまな協力、そして連携の中でも G7 の枠を超えて G20 にもより気候変動のさらなるアクションに対するコミュニケをまとめ上げることができた。そこは間違いなく私とケリー特使、そして関係の国々との協力が G7 から G20 へとつながった。そういうふうに考えています。そしてこの COP26 の成功のためには6条というこの交渉の妥結をしてルールブックを完成させなければいけません。この6条の交渉を妥結できれば世界の温室効果ガスの排出のさらなる深掘りが可能だというふうに専門家も言っています。27% に相当する CO2 の排出量をより削減をできる。このマーケットメカニズムをしっかりこのパリ協定のルールブックで完成をさせること、そこに向けてケリー気候特使とも連携をしたい、そう考えていますし、そのためには日本もアメリカもそれぞれの立場に固執をしないで、いかに世界各国の歩み寄りを引き出すことができるか、そこが非常に重要だと考えています。
Thank you. I think probably the biggest country that people are wondering about and thinking about, and I know Secretary Kerry, you're headed out to China, is the role of China in all this. So I was wondering if I could ask you, Secretary Kerry, maybe to address China. I know I've heard you say that U.S.-China climate cooperation is the only way to break free from the world's current mutual suicide pact. So what kind of US-China cooperation or global cooperation with China is possible, and will it be enough?
Well, everything is possible. It's really up to the Chinese to make a decision that's based on science, based on facts. I want to emphasize, I have worked very, very closely with Xi Jinping, our counterpart on this, and he is a man of good faith and very intelligent, very committed on the issue. But the leadership, the upper level leadership of China needs to take steps that are entirely doable. We're not asking China to do something that's impossible or extremely difficult even. Some of it's hard, but it's not out of reach. What I'm talking about is China has been bringing massive amount of coal-fired power online in the last few years. China has a huge economy, obviously, and much of it is built on fossil fuel production of their power and their industry, cement industry, steel industry, these kinds of industries. And those are very highly intensive energy using industries, which are not sufficiently capturing the emissions and abating. So it's very important for us to work together. I'm not pointing a finger at any country. And I would emphasize to China, nothing that I'm saying by any standard is based on politics or ideology or grand strategy, except the strategy of dealing with the climate crisis. And China, to its credit, has done an extraordinary job of building an economy that is the largest producer of renewable energy in the world. And China has, in fact, deployed the largest amount of renewable energy in the world. But to me, that just proves that China has the ability actually to take bigger steps to make a difference here. We believe very deeply that we honor the principle, as does Minister Koizumi, of common but differentiated responsibility. That is a phrase that represents a guiding principle of how we have approached the Paris Agreement and the issue of climate. In other words, not every less developed country or every country can do or has to do what one of the developed countries that has greater technological and financial capacity to do something. We're not saying do the same. What we are saying is do enough to avoid the worst damages. We'll do more. We're going to do a 50 to 52% cut. We're going to do it. And by 2035, our power will be 100% carbon free, our power production in America. So we're going way beyond what China will or other countries will. But we can't have China peaking in its emissions 10 years from now, saying they're going to peak in 2030. And that's really the heart of the discussion. We've got to move faster together. And we're asking China, and I think in the doing of this, China really earns itself a seat at the global table of leadership that's very important and very special, because we can't do it if China is not prepared to do these things. And I think it's going to create enormous other problems, because many countries are now talking about carbon border adjustment mechanisms, different ways of dividing up the global economy, which could become very complicated for everybody. So my hope is that reason will prevail and that we can work very closely with China, and that cooperation can open the door to cooperating with China on other issues that we need to obviously resolve.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. Minister Koizumi, I know, for Japan, China also is an important country to work with on climate cooperation, but you also are looking at the whole region, the Indo-Pacific region, which is so important to Japan's security and US security, where there are actually a lot of vulnerable countries and emerging economies that are struggling with the climate effects and adaptation. So can you talk a little bit about sort of your message for some of these emerging and vulnerable countries and perhaps any comments you have on China as well? Thanks.
日本とアメリカ、そして G7 合わせて世界の中で CO2 排出は約 25% です。G7 で。しかし中国1カ国で約 30% です。先月、ケリー気候特使がロンドンでステートメントを発表しましたが、その中でも言っている通り、もし中国が現在の計画を維持して2030年まで排出量のピークを迎えないとすると、他の国は2040年、もしくは2035年までにカーボンニュートラルを達成しなければいけないということになります。しかしそれは現実的なことではありません。つまり、今の中国の計画のままで、パリ協定の目標達成も私はできないと思うし、その中国の前向きな協力があれば、私たち世界全体で成功に導くことができるということを中国に理解してもらわなければいけません。日本も2035年までに新車販売は 100% 電動車にします。そして我々が新しく作り上げているエネルギーの政策においても最優先にするのは再生可能エネルギーに原則を置くということになりました。この日本とアメリカで我々は 46%、そして目指すところは 50% の高みを目指して2030年まで非常に意欲的な目標達成に向けて国内の政策もしっかりと前に進めていきます。こういったメッセージを中国、そしてインド、世界各国の排出国、代表的な排出国に対しても我々のメッセージを届けていきたい。そして我々できることは協力をしていきたいと考えています。
Great, thank you. Well, you've both talked about the commitments that Japan and US have respectively made. And so it might be useful to spend some time talking a little bit more about your domestic priorities and how to achieve some of those commitments. And Minister Koizumi, you just mentioned the decarbonization goals of Japan. So maybe we could ask you to talk a little bit more about what your roadmap is for your achieving some of your decarbonization goals and reducing demand in Japan.
まず重要なのは2030年の 46%、そして 50% の高みを目指すこと、さらに2050年カーボンニュートラル。この2050年カーボンニュートラルを日本は去年の10月に菅総理が表明をしましたが、この表明を今年の国会で法律に変えました。しかも重要なことは、この法律は与党野党全会一致で成立をしたということです。つまり政策の継続性が担保されている。そういったことを私は今日聞いているオーディエンスの中のビジネスの関係者、そして世界の国々に伝えたいと思います。なぜなら、これは一総理のメッセージだけではなくて、日本はこれから継続的な政策の法的な根拠を持ってカーボンニュートラルを進めていくというその意味だからです。日本は政治的な対立が気候変動の分野にはありません。その政治的な基盤を生かして着実に政策を強化していきたいと思います。まずはこの5年間のうちに政策を集中的に投下をして2030年までに日本の中で100カ所の脱炭素の先行地域を作っていくロードマップを私たちは作っています。そのためにも重要なのは、私たち中央政府だけではなくて、地方の自治体の役割が大事です。地方の自治体の後押しをするために、新しい政策のツールも私たちは作り上げて、再生可能エネルギーを導入すれば、その自治体に対してより補助が出る、サポートができる。そういった新制度を私たちは今、詳細な制度設計をやっています。そしてそれを日本の国内だけではなくて、海外にもこの脱炭素ドミノを広げていきたいと考えています。先日、東京都とクアラルンプールで、東京の協力のもと、クアラルンプールが2050年までのカーボンニュートラルを宣言するという、そういったこの海外に脱炭素ドミノを広げることに成功しました。これからもこの日本の国内でやっている取り組みを海外にも広げていく。特に インド太平洋、この地域の中でその協力を広げていくことが日本としては我々ができる貢献だとも考えています。
Thank you. That's a really interesting vision and exciting vision, the decarbonization domino. Could you talk a little bit more about what one of these model areas that you mentioned, how you envision those model areas developing and contributing on decarbonization?
例えば日本の中で長野県という、県があります。この長野県は、最近大きな災害に襲われて、もはやこのままでは将来の国民の命は、県民の命は守れない。変わらなければいけない。その危機感のもとに気候非常事態宣言を長野県はして、さらにそれから2050年カーボンニュートラルに向けた政策を一気に加速しています。なんと長野県は日本の政府の目標を超える2030年までに 60% の温室効果ガスの削減を目指すという目標を掲げ、さらにこれから新しい住宅はすべてゼロエネルギーハウスにする。こういった原則を打ち立てて政策を進めています。さっき私が説明をした国が地方自治体をサポートする新しい補助金、新しい制度。これはこのような長野県のような先行的に意欲的に取り組んでいる地域を全力で支えていく取り組みを進めていくということです。
Great, thank you for sharing that. Secretary Kerry, you talked earlier about abatement and moving away from fossil fuels. And I was wondering if you could spend a little time talking to us about your views on renewables and alternates to fossil fuels. And how are we going to reach our potential for renewable energy, especially in the areas of wind and solar?
Well, renewables are the mainstay of the alternative to what we're doing today. We have made remarkable leaps forward in our capacity to utilize renewables. It is now very, very clear, it's not a contest, that it is cheaper to use solar or wind than it is to use coal. It was cheaper for quite some period of time because nobody has honestly appraised the real costs of coal. You never see that entering into the marketplace. For instance, coal never, you never see a charge to the companies for the cost of black lung disease or the cost of sludge that destroys the fishing and swimming in rivers or streams. You see no pass on whatsoever of the true cost of coal in what it has done to the oceans with the acidity that is now killing off our coral reefs and the rise of temperature of the oceans. 90% of the warming of the planet, that heat goes into the ocean. And you're now seeing marine biologists and oceanographers and others will tell you the ocean chemistry is changing faster than it has in millions of years today. So again, hard to play with fire on water, but water does burn where there's methane that bubbles up and, it burns. And what we're seeing here is a recklessness, frankly, that persists in a way in which a bunch of people make a lot of money today. They like their status quo, and some of them are resisting. And they resist with lies and distortions, with public campaigns that mislead people about what the true effects of the byproducts are. So I think renewables are obviously a gigantic component of the solution here to what we need to do. Now, you will always hear the argument, well, what about my base load? How do I make sure my factory can still run when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining? Well, first of all, if you build a really competent energy grid, the provision of energy, and you have a smart energy grid, it's much easier to be able to manage effectively, and that raises your prospects of being able to supply very large proportions of your energy needs from renewables. And there are some countries, I think there are 2 or 3 countries now that are at 100% renewable. Iceland is one of them, for instance. Now, Iceland is blessed with significant geothermal, and they use geothermal and hydro, and together they have a great mix. But you can build a smartness into your grid if you build regionally, for instance. Ultimately, Canada, the US, and Mexico could have an incredibly virtuous grid using the differences between our wind, our sun, and our hydro. Mexico could be an enormous provider of renewable energy. There are just so many possibilities we're not tapping into. So renewable energy is really one of the biggest components of any solution. Now, I happen to believe we have to have an all of the above strategy right now. And that includes working hard to find out whether or not Bill Gates and the breakthrough technology initiatives will be able to provide small, highly contained, very simple nuclear-based batteries or reactor, whatever you want to call it, that's transportable, that does not melt down, that does not have the waste problem of today, uses the waste, in fact, in its cycle, and that it may be possible to provide absolutely zero emission energy from that next generation of small modular reactors. Now, I know in a place like Japan, people are terrified of that because of Fukushima. In other parts of the world, people say, no, 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 we can't even contemplate it. But the truth is, this is a very different technology from what has preceded it. And so the Chernobyls and the 3 Mile Islands are not really what define the future. The future should be defined by what the newest technology is able to provide. We use nuclear reactors on Navy ships. I was in the Navy for 4 years, and I worked with some. I wasn't on one, but I worked with some of those nuclear ships. They didn't have to refuel the way we did. And in all the years, about 70 years, 75 years of use, they've never lost a sailor. They've never had an accident, meltdown. They've never lost a ship or anything. So I believe look at what happens with coal today. We're killing people with floods, with mudslides, with fires, with pollution. We lose 10 million of people a year on the planet because of air pollution, much of which comes from automobiles and our factories. So we just got to be smarter. I don't know how to put it. We got to get out of our own way here. And these things are doable. The question is, can we overcome the bureaucratic and natural resistance of people to change? And I think this new report hopefully will act as a major impetus for us to do exactly that, to buy into the future, to trust the future, to discover the future, to define the future. All of that is at our fingertips. And we have to avoid building the future by making the mistakes we've made in the past.
残念ながら日本では福島で原子力災害が起きてしまいました。それから日本は何よりも安全を最優先にしなければならない。そういったことを考えて、今回菅総理はこれから日本のエネルギー政策は再生可能エネルギーを最優先にするんだと。この新しい原則を立ち上げました。ですから日本がこれからいかに早く化石燃料型のエネルギー政策からより脱炭素型に進めていけるかは、再生可能エネルギーをどれだけの勢いで早く日本に導入できるかにかかってきます。私はその再生可能エネルギー導入の進めている一人でありますので、先ほどケリー特使からは地熱の発言がありましたが、2030年までに日本も地熱を倍増させる、その新たな目標も掲げています。日本はこれから再生可能エネルギーを最優先にして進めていく、そのことを明確にお伝えしたいと思います。
Great, thank you. Well, it's an exciting vision, some of the breakthrough technologies and moving to the renewables. One thing that does come to mind, though, is to think about, inevitably there'll be winners and losers in these kinds of transitions. When we shift to clean energy, what are some of the thoughts you have, and maybe Minister Koizumi, in terms of how we can help some of the key sectors and companies and communities manage the downsides of these transitions?
まず、この再生可能エネルギーがこれから産業構造を転換しなければいけない、その産業にも、そして地域にも、なぜ再生可能エネルギーが重要かということをしっかりと伝えていく必要があると思います。再生可能エネルギーに日本がより導入することができれば、今までだったら地域の外に出ていった資金を、日本は地域の中で資金循環を回すことができます。そしてさらに、我々化石燃料に多い年では17兆円もの巨額を海外に石炭、石油、天然ガスで支払っていました。再生可能エネルギーが導入できれば、その海外への支払いが減り、より国内への投資に回すことができます。その国内の投資に回したことを新たな産業に移行する、その公正な移行に対して向けていくことが私は大切なことだと思っています。環境省としても特に中小企業大変です。この中小企業が CO2 の削減をより頑張れば頑張るほど国からのサポートがいく。そういった形の新たな支援制度も今、省の中で議論して制度設計を進めているところです。
Great, thank you. Secretary Kerry, do you have any additional thoughts on, maybe from a U.S. perspective, inside our own country, but globally, how we help manage some of the downsides of transition?
Well, let me, I do have thoughts about it. I mean, the first thought is we absolutely need to make this transition fair. We need to be very thoughtful and sensitive to anybody who is affected by the transition. Those words have been used before, and sometimes people get left behind, and we can't allow that to happen. I think what we're seeing here, though, frankly, this is a very different kind of public issue, to be honest with you. I mean, I've been involved in this process now since the late 1960s, early 70s, and I've watched a lot of issues come our way. And usually, if you're in politics and you have to vote, raise your hand in the Senate or the House or a parliament somewhere, you get one or two benefits, or you get one benefit if you're lucky, and then there's some downsides, and you got to make tough decisions. This is a no-brainer in that regard. Why? Because there's so many upsides. Because you have our health affected by bad air. As I said, pollution killing 10 million people. So we clean up the air. We reduce the hospitalization of children. We hospitalize so many children in the summer because of environmentally induced asthma that we actually spend about $50 billion a year on this. That's just one health consequence. That's without the complications of COVID, without the complications of emphysema, heart disease, all the other things. Then, of course, you have the benefits to the economy itself. The fastest growing job in the United States last year, and will be again this year, is wind turbine technician. And solar power technician, solar panel installer was number 3 fastest growing job. Those jobs, by the way, pay somewhere in the vicinity of, I think, about $24 an hour. That's the median hourly wage. And many of those jobs don't require a college degree. They require a high school diploma. So you can actually do better than you do in today's world of a minimum wage. And there are projects that are going to be taking place all across the country. We don't even have a grid in America. We have individual grids, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, one in Texas all by itself. We saw what happened with that. And then in the north, the line, but there's a big gaping hole in the middle of our country where we, the nation that went to the moon, invented the internet, has created vaccines and cured various diseases. We can't send a simple electron from California to New York. That's stupid. It's insane. And so with quantum computing, with artificial intelligence, we could be, putting in place a grid that allows us to anticipate energy needs from one part of the country to the other and make sure we're sending it where it's needed. We could have a blend of wind and sun and hydro and geothermal, and you mix those together and all of a sudden you've got a whole different picture. And by the way, building that out, which is what President Biden's infrastructure bill is about. And it's what the reconciliation bill is about. You have to invest in your future. This is not expenditure, this is investment. Our parents' generation built the highway system, built the airports, built the trains. We're just busy, riding them into the ground or driving them into the ground. We don't refix them and repay them enough. So I think that we have a chance here of having a huge economic boost, health boost, national security. We don't have to fight for energy coming from another country, produce it ourselves, clean. I mean, the benefits of this are so enormous, and then you have to measure it against the costs of not doing it. Mm-hmm. Every major economic analysis says it is far, far more expensive to taxpayers not to do what we need to do than to do it. And that is a pretty, when do you get a choice like that in public life, where you can look at your voters and say, everything is on the upside in doing this? And yes, there's some transition, but we've been through those before in the late 1800s with the cotton gin and the mills and the textiles and shoes and leather and all the things we did. That's all changed. And we went through it in the 1990s, when we had a huge technology revolution and we changed the way we type and how we send information. But guess what? We got down to almost zero unemployment in the last few years. We have the ability to put people to work in this transition, and I think it's a very exciting time.
Thank you. It is very exciting. So maybe the next question I'd like to ask you both is, what can we do to help? What you've laid out is such an ambitious agenda. The government can do a lot, but there are limits to what the government can do. So what can organizations like the U.S. Japan Council and our networks, what can the individuals and corporations that are joining us here for the webinar, what can we do to advance this agenda? Maybe Minister Koizumi, we'll start with you.
またぜひこういう機会を作ってください。それと日米という重要な同盟国の間で若い世代も通じてお互いがそれぞれどのような気候変動対策を進めているか、今日私はケリー特使の話も聞きながら学ぶこともいっぱいありました。そしてこの今日の話を私はアメリカの若い世代にも多くの若い世代に聞いてほしい。日本がどういう思いで気候変動対策を進めているか。そして日本の若い世代にも今日米でケリー気候特使と私で気候変動の課題についてここまでの話ができる関係が日米になった。これは今私はケリー気候特使とこうやって話してますけど、数年前に日本の大臣とアメリカの史上初めての気候変動特使という立場のケリー特使とこのようなコミュニケーションが数年前ですら想像できなかったと思いますよ。それが新しい日米の気候パートナーシップが生まれた日米の新しいフロンティアです。そしてそのフロンティアを生きるのが次の世代、ジェネレーション Z と言われる Z 世代の皆さんですから、米日カウンセルの皆さんの大事なミッションでもある日米の中で相互の理解を深めること、特に若い世代の理解を深めること、そこが私はものすごく大事なところだし、米日カウンセルに期待するところでもあります。
Thank you. We are excited to take that challenge. So thank you very much and to work with you. Secretary Kerry, how about you? What is what is the call to action you'd like to leave the audience with, how we can help advance your agenda? You mentioned earlier leadership in every element, so I think that's a very key call to action for us, but do you have anything else to add?
I think that people need to feel empowered and start speaking up and taking part. And we need the business world. We need the business community to join together. We've been putting together an entity working with the World Economic Forum. It's a first movers coalition. And every company in Japan could begin to say, you know what? We're going to buy green steel. The next building we build in our city is not going to be built with people who build it in a dirty, made the steel in a dirty way, or the concrete, or the cement, or the aluminum. So there's a great corporate responsibility opportunity here. Need, not just opportunity, but there's a demand for it. And young people and everybody, and the products you build, you buy. Every friend I have now, I say, why are you buying an internal combustion engine car? That's over. Go buy an electric car. And you know, I think there's every reason in the world to do that at this point in time. By the way, I think they're better by far, and they're quieter and they're faster and they drive well, and you know, you don't have to go into a gas station and put your money to work to pollute the world. We still don't have a virtuous cycle in the production of it. I know that. We still have, you know, the car itself may be clean because it doesn't burn the fuel, but a lot of the materials that go into the car are produced in ways that are still dirty. But that's going to change. That's going to change. And what all the companies listening to this can do, and governments can do, cities, mayors have already been making huge contribution, but you can change your building codes. You can change your fleet purchases of vehicles. You can accelerate this. And that's what we need to do now. Make smart decisions in the daily choices of our lives, and that will change things.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to bring this dialogue to a close, but I appreciate the suggestion that we continue these dialogues in the future. So I just want to say on behalf of everybody listening, thank you both for making time to share your insights with us today and for giving us all the chance to listen to what's top of mind for you. More importantly, thank you for your deep commitment to address the climate crisis and your truly global leadership. You both are working for our planet's and its people's very survival, and we cannot thank you enough. So we hope that you leave today knowing that the U.S. Japan Council and our community of individuals, companies, and organizations are ready to help, bringing the whole of society approach in support of the power of people-to-people ties. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
ありがとうございました。
I'll see you soon, Koizumi-san. See you soon.
See you next week.
And to those of you in the audience, please take a moment to reflect on what you can do and what we can do together to adapt, to mitigate, to innovate, and to educate so that we can reach the ambitious but necessary goals our leaders have set for us. Take action where you can and let us know where you see opportunities to work together. Please send us your name and ideas at the link that is in the chat. I'd like to take a moment to again thank our wonderful sponsors. Please join me in appreciation because without their financial support, the Council would not be able to do its work. We're proud of the diversity of individuals and corporations from Japan and the United States, active across many sectors and in many markets, who support the Council. This reflects the breadth and intensity of support for strengthening the U.S.-Japan relationship, fostering leaders for the future, and leveraging people-to-people ties to solve important problems. As you look at the logos and names listed of our sponsors, I hope you're inspired. If you already sponsor us, thank you. I hope you see potential new partners in the USJC community. And if you're not a sponsor and are interested to know more, please let us know. I'd also like to preview our upcoming events. For members, please mark your calendar for the Members Forum, October 21st. Our next bilateral boardroom, Purpose-Driven Leadership in U.S.-Japan Relations, is open to all and will be held on November 16th in the States and the 17th in Japan. And like last year, we will end the year on the most optimistic note possible with our Next Generation Summit on December 10th and 11th. Until then, thank you for joining us.